So I'm very happy to get started and to have the pleasure to introduce Olwyn Alexander, our guest speaker this afternoon. And I expect some of you will be familiar with Olwyn, who's worked in EAP for many, many years. But if you haven't worked with her at Heriot-Watt, or if you haven't been mentored by her in one of your TEAP observations, or if you haven't used one of her excellent books, either EAP Essentials, which she wrote with Sue and Jennifer. I think Sue's with us this afternoon.
Yes.
Yeah, hi Sue. And also the Access EAP Foundation and Frameworks course book, some of you may be familiar with. If you don't know her from any of these places, then I'm very happy to introduce you to Olwyn. And she's going to talk to us this afternoon about observations and the role of observations, how we can use those either as the observee, but also, I think, thinking about it from the perspective of those involved in observation as well. So I'm very happy if Olwyn is ready to hand over to her. Thank you, Olwyn.
Thanks very much, Lindsay. So I'm just going to share my screen with you. Hopefully I can get this to work and put it into presenter mode. There we go. And one thing I wanted to ask about, one of the things I'm going to get people to do is to make little notes on the Padlet. And I'm not sure if we've shared the Padlet with everybody yet. So I just wanted to check that with you. And if we haven't, maybe the link could go into the chat if that's appropriate. So I'm talking about observations in EAP, and I want to make it clear that I'm not handing down any wisdom here. I think this is an area, well, it's obviously an area of interest because there are a lot of people here, but it's an area that we're all sort of exploring and experimenting with. And so this is a workshop, and for me, a workshop is something in which you do work. And the work here is going to be a task, which is a kind of an experiment. So that's what I'm hoping we'll do. And the aim is just to develop a discussion around observation practice, to get different people's ideas about it from different contexts. So I'm going to put up a few things which I think perhaps we all know about observations to begin with, just as a way of setting the scene, if you like, and then introduce, that'll take me about 20 or 30 minutes. I'm going to introduce a task, a workshop task, which is going to be blind observations. And that's where the observer is not actually present in the classroom or online, if it's an online classroom, watching as you teach, but you describe salient parts of the lesson that you have taught to discuss with somebody who's acting as your interlocutor or observer. And I got this idea from Maxine Gilway, who was obliged to do this kind of thing during the pandemic, when we couldn't go into people's classes and when it was not possible in one instance to go online. So once we've tried out this task, and it really is trying out, there's no success or failure involved here, we'll come back and have some plenary feedback. So the first thing I want to talk about is the fear of being observed. And this is where the Padlet comes in. So I want you to think about how you feel about having an observer in your classroom and whether it makes a difference what type of observation it is, if it's formal or informal or a peer observation, so that you should be able to hopefully see a Padlet. Have we got that in the chat? Yes, we have. And I just want you just to write 2 or 3 words, the first 2 or 3 words that come into your head, to capture your feelings about observation and about what could improve the experience in your view. So I'm going to give you just a minute or two to do that. Just the first things that come into your head. Okay, so I'm going to keep talking, but please feel free to complete that little exercise just as we go through. I'll be able to look at the Padlet later. I'm not going to step out of this presentation at the moment to look at it, but I'll look at it later while you're doing the task. So these three quotes come from data that I collected with Sue and Judith Gorham, who the three of us have just completed a little research project looking at recordings of online lessons from the pre-sessional at Heriot Watt in 2020. And the teachers gave us permission to use these for our research project. I thought we would be able to do it without the teachers knowing which lesson we would be observing, but actually that wasn't possible because we had to ask for permission for ethical approval. And so the first teacher didn't know they were going to be observed, and they were glad for the opportunity to be seen as they really are without any pretense. But the second two did, and this was their response. And I was really interested in the idea of pretense, for better or worse. Why do teachers feel they need to pretend for an observation? And then the idea of feeling slightly uncomfortable or panicked. Why does how does student behaviour impact on the observation experience? They choose that day to be unresponsive, is what that teacher is saying. And then the other question is, well, why is a bad performance not a valuable observation experience? So these are the sorts of things just to kind of have in the back of your mind. I mean, we ask students to learn from their mistakes and we give them feedback on their mistakes. Why can't we do the same? Why do we have to pretend and display when we're doing observations? So the next thing to think about, of course, is the observer's paradox, because we want to know, is the observation necessarily inauthentic? And this comes from Lebov in 1972, who was doing linguistic research. But as soon as you tell people what you're researching, they stop presenting the kind of linguistic data that you want to collect. But then the opposite of that is the Hawthorne effect, when efficiency engineers went into the Hawthorne works, and they found that merely by being there and observing the workers, efficiency improved. So is this an inauthentic experience? And I want to think about today, what positive outcomes can be gained from being observed? So I wonder if observation implies change and if that is slightly problematic. So here's the old joke, which we can all laugh at. How many psychiatrists does it take to change a light bulb? Well, just one, but the light bulb has really got to want to change. And I think this might be an issue with observation. If we say observation's about development, it's not about monitoring, it's not about policing what teachers do, but it's intended as development. But, you know, is that necessarily a good thing? Is a part of the fear of being observed about resistance to change? I don't know. I'm just throwing that one out there to see what people think about that. So I want to think about whether observation can be positive or not. And I think it can. You know, I've had some very positive observation experiences in my teaching career with people I trusted coming into my classroom so that we could compare the different ways we taught. So it's a way to compare your practice with peers or experienced practitioners. And the thing I want to get at today is I think it can help you to develop metacognition. In other words, thinking about your teaching. What kinds of things are you doing? And this helps you to understand the basis for the teaching decisions that you make, and it can make explicit your underlying theory of teaching. Because it's not always easy to work out, well, why is it that I decided to do it that way, and what theories am I calling on in my teaching? So observations are obviously a really good way to provide evidence for a TEAP portfolio if you're thinking of working towards that qualification. And they are evidence that enable you to answer the questions, what entitles you to claim that you're a competent EAP teacher, and how do you know that what you do is effective EAP teaching? Oh, we seem to have somebody with their microphone on, or I can hear them, so maybe turn that off. So when I do TEAP observations, I've done a few of them over the last year or two. My aim is to try to help teachers to give their best possible performance. So we do the usual pre and post observation discussions, but in the pre-observation discussion, I really try to delve into how could we make this lesson look good, look the best possible lesson, so that the evidence we get from it is the best evidence that you can put into your portfolio. Now that's quite a different sort of aim from any kind of quality assurance aim that you might do as a manager, for example. But I think that, again, these TEAP portfolios ask you to try to be explicit about your underlying theories of teaching and the basis for your teaching decisions. So the observation can help with that, and the discussion with the TEAP mentor can help with that. So I thought, and I think it's always a good idea if you're going to talk about something that you should experience it yourself. And I have been observed in my teaching career, not a huge amount. And at one time I was actually quite keen on observing teachers team teaching. And then I thought of turning that round and having a pair of my colleagues observe me. So I wanted to sort of think about what it's like to be observed. And I asked two colleagues to jointly observe the same lesson. I think it was actually 2020, not 2019, but it's all becoming a bit blurred now. And I was teaching a course entitled Text Practices, and I'll give you a bit more detail about that in a minute. My focus for this observation, it was early on in the course, the second of the lessons, and my focus was the level of engagement that the students had with the materials. I wanted my colleagues to think about that. And I asked them each to write a report on what they observed, and I'm going to draw some comments to sort of illustrate the kind of thing that I think might be helpful for you to do when you do the task this afternoon. So it's really the case that a teacher has their own underlying theory of language, learning and teaching, but so does an observer. Observer is just a teacher who's got into a management position. And I think we've got to recognise that observers don't have the right answers either. And I want to sort of demonstrate that with this little example. So text practices, you may have been able to download the materials. They're on my blog, EAP Essentials, and the aim of the overall course was to develop a critical awareness of the audience, purpose, structure, functions, and linguistic features of academic research genres, the kinds of things the students were going to have to write. And the text I'd found was Newton's original letter to the Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society, published in 1671. And he was explaining his experiment with a prism to separate the light out into a rainbow. So what I wanted to explore this lesson was how report writing style had evolved since Newton's time and why that was. And the idea of that was that the audience and the purpose had changed since Newton wrote, and so therefore the structure and the style also needed to change. So I'm just going to show you the text, and I'm going to give you a little bit of time to read it, but I want you to think about your view of the language in this text, because that's what the observers commented on. And I just want you to think about what you would do. So just have that in your mind. You don't need to feed that back, but I just want you to read the text and think about what's your view of the language and what would you do. I'll give you a few minutes just to read.